Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about Vault 2021, What's New. It's actually a pretty exciting release, I have to say. There's some really interesting things. Last year was pretty good. There was a lot of like little minor things. This year, there's some fantastic new additions, and I'm really excited to share. So those additions, they fall into three primary buckets. Productivity for CAD users. The big one, which is kind of in the middle of the presentation this morning, smart duplicate reduction, which is something that I think Autodesk has been working on for quite a while. It actually made its debut, I believe, in update 2 for 2020. It's rolled into the full product as of 2021, and it's amazing. And then some really nice minor but very useful tweaks for Vault administration that I think if you have a specific need for one of those in particular, but also if you just administrate Vault from day to day, I think there's some really nice little usability tweaks. There's some nice usability tweaks throughout the release as well. And so again, as we go through this, if you've got questions, please feel free to type them into the question pane. I'll be keeping an eye on those as we go through. And if the question's particularly relevant to what I'm talking about, I'll probably address it in context. Otherwise, I may address toward the end of the presentation. All right, so let's start with productivity for CAD users. Inventor has gotten some nice new interoperability with Revit recently, and I'll admit I haven't been keeping up on all of the additions to Inventor over the last couple of years, so I don't know if this is maybe something that got introduced in 2020 or if it's brand new for 2021, but some really interesting behavior if you work with Revit data in Inventor. So especially if you're an equipment supplier or fabricator for the building industry, and you have to incorporate Revit data into your Inventor models, but it didn't come from you, or you don't want to manage it in your Vault especially. There's some really nice new features in 2021 for that, right? And especially when you get into a lot of people these days use BIM 360 docs or BIM 360 to manage their Revit data in the cloud. Well, if you want to reference that data in Inventor, how does that work? And if you've got vaults, how does that work if you've inserted Revit data into Inventor, right? What's really great about this, and I have some hope that they're going to expand this capability, but what's really interesting is you can reference that Revit data in Inventor just like any other imported CAD document. So you're not converting it, right? You're referencing it. You're referencing that Revit data, but Vault ignores it. So even though Inventor, the Inventor assembly has a reference to the Revit data, Vault essentially pretends like it doesn't exist. So you can actually check that data into Vault. Your Inventor data still gets managed. And then when the file comes out of Vault, Inventor just does the looking for the Revit data wherever it's supposed to find it. As far as I know, that's the first, this is the first time that we're able to have vaulted data that has a reference to data that doesn't go into Vault, at least this kind of reference. And so I'm hopeful that this might expand a little bit in the future to maybe give you an option, especially let's say to textures that are technically linked as like a third-party reference that you then have to somehow deal with to either put it into Vault or sever that link. Or maybe even if you really wanted to import some data into Vault, but you didn't have all the references and you still wanted to get it in there and manage it and then clean it up later. That's not necessarily the best idea, but other data management systems I've seen let you do that. And so it would be a real boon in some situations to be able to go ahead and vault data without all of the references. And this at the very least kind of opens the door to that, right? So we're going to take a look at that here in just a minute. Some other help for CAD users, again, pretty minor, but this could be a big deal in certain situations. There's a new property for documents that help you find orphan files. Essentially, think of it as part files that don't have any reference. So you're in the middle of a design project, you've created a design, you've got several parts in there, or you make some parts and you check them in and never get around to actually using them in an assembly because your design direction goes a different way. Well, those parts are just sitting in the vault doing nothing besides taking up space. And that problem can become substantial. Actually, one of our customers earlier this year, I wrote a script for them to find all of the parts in their vault that didn't have parent relationships. And it only took a couple hours to write the script, but then they have a very large vault, and it took a long time to run that script. I think maybe even over a weekend, just to develop this big file that says, here's all the unused files, and then they wanted to get rid of those. And so then you had to process that. It was a big deal to just find all these orphaned parts to clean up the vaults. And now as of 2021, we've got a property where we can just say, search for all the orphan files, and you can even show that icon in the UI. We'll take a look at that here in a second. So if you, and you probably know if your design process lends itself to this, if you've got a bunch of parts in the vault that aren't being used by anything and you want to clean those up, now it should be relatively straightforward to at least identify those files. And then if they can go, you just delete them, right? Now another really nice benefit for CAD users, a copy design enhancement that I was kind of surprised we didn't have in the past, is the ability to copy properties from the existing, source data to a property in the new copy. A prime example would be if you're making a copy design, if you're doing copy design, you're probably making new part numbers. And it might be a good idea to have maybe what the original part number was from that source data to provide a link back to what that happened to be. Now in Vault, in the history, you could always see, yes, copy design from, this assembly or whatever. But this would give you that information on the document itself. But another really nice thing is your copy design rules are now server-based. This is an issue with a lot of local settings when it comes to Vault, is things like saved searches and views, and prior to 2021, copy design rules would be local to the client, and you'd have to somehow distribute those. Now there's there was a tool from Autodesk that used to be in labs. I think it might be available on the App Store now. It used to be called Project Thunderdome, I believe, where you could extract Vault settings and apply them to clients. But I see Vault moving in this direction where certain things now, like copy design rules, are stored server side. And that gives me hope that things like maybe there'll be some server level defined views or saved searches that you could at least take advantage of. You wouldn't necessarily be forced on them, but with copy design especially, this is important, because if you want to make sure that certain things happen to your copies when you copy, that these things are in place, you don't have to worry about someone necessarily tweaking them for the way they want to do it, right? You can have nice, consistent copies, to get the design started off on the right foot. Right? And then a couple of other really nice changes. They're very minor changes, but they can make a really big difference in your day-to-day workflow, depending on how you work. The ability to have a filter now in the Vault browser for Inventor for out-of-date files. So you can see specifically if you don't keep your workspace particularly clean, for example, or if you're working collaboratively with somebody and they've just recently checked in a bunch of data, you know, you could see, okay, all of this stuff now needs to be updated. So that's a really nice change. But also, this one is really big. If you're following what is usually best practice, which is you're not allowed to, say, release an assembly before all of the references are also released. In the past, if any of the children weren't also released, the first restriction that came up, basically the first child it found that wasn't released, it would throw an error and it would say that child is not released. You need to fix it. But there might be 10 other parts that also weren't released. And so you'd fix that one part, release it again, and now the next one would throw an error, and then the next one. Now it'll find all of the restrictions and report all of those to you in a single dialog. So you could see, if nothing else, the scope of, oh wow, I have like a whole subassembly here that's not released, you know, versus just the first file that it finds. So again, this could be a huge help depending on your workflow. And then a really nice thing, I think part of this too might be because of one of the other features released this year, but the job queue used to be limited to showing only 1,000 jobs. And let's say you had something on your job processor go particularly wrong, and you had 3,000 jobs in your queue and the first 1,000 had errored out, you know, you'd have to deal with, say, the first 1,000, delete them, resubmit them, and let them get done or whatever before you could even start dealing with the others, right? So now we can at least have 10,000 jobs in the queue, which if your job processor's got 10,000 jobs in the queue, or your server's got 10,000 jobs in the queue regularly, you might need another job processor. So I don't know if we ever need to go above 10, but it's just a lot more user friendly, I would say. So let's take a quick look at some of these now. I don't want to necessarily PowerPoint you to death all at once. So we're going to start with the Revit interoperability. So this is just a real simple layout of some things I have in Inventor. And my idea here is I want to lay in the Revit data so that I can make sure that where I've got my equipment placed is right, and maybe I've got to design in some other things. And this is, you know, maybe this is a server room, these are going to be our racks. So I can place an imported CAD file and browse out to that Revit file that's got the data in it. Now, one thing to note, I have a Vault project file active. My workspace is in my Inventor workspace inside my demo Vault workspace, but my Revit file is actually, in this case, I've got it on a different folder on my computer. This could be on a network share somewhere. It actually could also be on BIM 360. I've got it on my local computer here for performance reasons, because we're, you know, I don't want to have us sit here waiting all day for files to open. But I have personally tested this on a network location as well, and it works without any trouble. So notice I'm referencing the model here. I'm not converting the Revit data in. And this Revit integration is really nice. I can take a look at all of the specific 3D views. In this case, we want our fire protection room. And this is going to just extract just those elements, in this case 276 elements that were in that view, and reference them in my Inventor model. I'm going to get a little warning about the number here. In this case, 250 elements is usually around the limit of what you want, but in this case, you know, it's really not a big deal at all. You know, 270 some elements just like that. And now I've got that Revit model in my Inventor assembly, and I can see, okay, yeah, it looks pretty good. I pretty much have it in the right spot. You know, this behaves just like as a part that I can turn the visibility off, and now I've got the Revit data in here, and I can start designing around, you know, my air handling system to make sure everything's in the right spot. And notice, again, this is a reference. I didn't import that geometry. It's like an XREF almost. It's a reference to that CAD file. And this is a vaulted assembly, right? So if I know I need a new copy of this thing, so I'm going to throw it in here somewhere. But I need to check that into Vault now. When I look at my Vault browser, what you'll notice is the Revit file does not appear. It's not there. And so I'm free to check that this Inventor assembly back into Vault, even though the Revit file is not going to go with it. Right? So if this is a workflow that you needed or wanted to take advantage of, but you didn't want to throw your Revit data into Vault, because yes, you can put Revit files into Vault, but Vault, frankly, does not do a great job of managing Revit data. BIM 360 does a much better job. And so now you can kind of have the best of both worlds here. You can manage your Revit data in the cloud, or even reference someone else's Revit data from the cloud in Inventor. We can import Revit data from the cloud, and you can still vault your Inventor data. So I think that's just great. I love the capability we have to do that, right? So that to me is a huge deal. Just to show you the has parent property, this is great. I've got a view here already. We had the has drawing property. I think that might have gotten added last year or the year before. So that would let you know, like, if you had documented this part, right, which is maybe part of knowing whether or not you can nuke like a child with no parent assembly. But now, again, we also have that has parent relationship. So you can show it in the grid here, and it actually has a really nice, a really cool little icon where if you look here, whether it has a parent or not, but of course it's a property, so you can always do a search here, right? Has parent relationship is true or is false in this case. Right, so maybe this, and then file extension is IPT. Right, and so these are all of the files in my vault, and I can even have a saved search. So periodically I could come into my saved search here and say, okay, here are all the files. In this case, we have 61 parts in our vault that don't have parent relationships. And maybe I can just go ahead and delete all these, right? Because nothing uses them, right? Or at least I can, look through them pretty quickly and see maybe what has to stay and what could go, right? The copy design improvements, I think are pretty cool. If I find an assembly here to copy, let's find a good one here. Let's look for one of these carburetor assemblies. There we go. So what I could do is I could do copy design here, and you'll note that our action rules are still here, but these are now all server-based. They're no longer just stored on the client computer. And I've got a rule set here now that copies my original part number. So I could say, just in this case, the rule condition, any criteria, if you always want the rule to fire, a good one's just say, either part number is not empty, or, file name is not empty, right? And then you could say, well, now my new property in the new document, original part number, should be copied from any of the properties of the original, right? And so this will extract the part number from the original document and copy it into this original part number field, right? And so, you know, by doing that, you can actually capture into the original part number field the original part number from the copy, right? So, and that would apply to any property, right? You could take any property from the original document, copy it into the same property or into, you know, some mashup, a different property, etc. So that to me is a really nice capability. The children thing, right? Release restrictions. I wanted to show you what that looks like too. So in this case, I've got a file that's a work in progress. It's in my simple release process, which has those restrictions. You can see there are several different children here that are not released. If I try to release this assembly now, what should happen is it's going to say, no, you can't do that. And here are all of the children that are not released. Prior to 2021, I'd only get this first one. And it wouldn't tell me, oh, by the way, also this file and this one and this one and this one are also not released. So I would do the first one and then come back and, okay, now, you know, this one is not released, and then this one, and the spring, and the intake plate, and one by one, and have to, or you'd have to go and look through this list and say, okay, yeah, here they all are. But this one's simple. If you had a very large, complex assembly where files are scattered everywhere, you know, a big tree structure here, it could be real painful, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. So, oh, and just to highlight, to show you here in Inventor, on the Vault tab, filter out of date files, right? So anything that's out of date will show up in the browser. And you can filter maybe to show me only out of date, because it would show up before, but now you can filter and say only show me that out of date stuff. All right. So some additional, the next set of changes here, this is kind of getting more into the admin kind of stuff, but it's still kind of end user as well. ECO notification changes. Now, we still can't send an email directly to a server that uses TLS or SSL, as far as I know. You would still have to set up a relay, like a server that doesn't use encryption that could then forward on to maybe your primary email server to bounce it somewhere. But this change is pretty nice. We can now customize the email, at least to some degree, that goes when you change state in an ECO. And there's a new UI to do this. And this includes the ability to include ECO properties in the subject line and the body of the email, things like the name of the ECO, the state that it's currently in, etc. But also be able to include details about each of the items or files controlled by the ECO and information about those things as well. So if you really need, for example, to include the title of the item so that people know, can actually understand what it is versus just an item number, you can do that. And again, the template for this is stored on the server, so it's not a per user thing. All right, so just to take a quick look at that, this is an administrative type setting, but this gives us the ability here to include, you can see what should go along with each of those things. So like entity name, and state, entity URI there would be the link to the ECO to open it up in the thick client. Vault name, username, time, so these things, and then affected items, affected files. This is where, you know, the placeholder for the information about the controlled records would be. And these blocks include the properties that you have down here. So in this case, we'd be including the description of the item, but we could also say, not only do I want to include the description of the item, but maybe, some specific property that we're tracking as well. And now that would be included in the affected items list. There's one thing that I think I can just mention. I don't have anything really to show about it. Navisworks Files, we've got a little bit better support for that. The ability to generate DWF files for Navisworks. Prior to this release, if you didn't have Navisworks installed, there was a Navisworks file in the Vault and there was no DWF to preview it, you couldn't update preview. Now you can, even without Navisworks installed. And you can also push Navisworks files as shared views. So if you're not familiar with a shared view, this is something that's been added in within the last couple of releases, where you can take a part, an assembly, even now a Navisworks file, a drawing, and create a shared view up in the Autodesk cloud. That's a neutral format. Your design data is protected. You can send that link to maybe someone outside your company for review, for markup, for comment, and you can view those comments right inside of Vault even. So shared views, if you're not using them, if you need to collaborate with others, shared views are a great way to do that without having to send a step file or a DWF and have somebody install it, right? It lives up in the cloud. By default, they expire in 30 days. You can extend those if necessary. All those great things we can do with Inventor files and AutoCAD files, we can now do with Navisworks files. Right. So those are some sort of like usability enhancements. They may or may not apply to you depending on your day-to-day workflow. There's some really nice things in there. The next big feature, and really I think the killer feature of this release and maybe from the past few releases, is the idea of smart duplicate reduction. What you'll see in the Vault now, if you've installed the 2020.2 update or the 2021 already, you'll see it in Vault and manifests as what's called the duplicates dashboard. If you manage parts, so if you are like design and build one-off machinery manufacturing, this may not apply so much to you. But if you manage parts at all and you come up with a new part, you assign it a part number, you have to validate that part. It has to go through QA. You have to either make it or pay somebody to make it for you. You have to keep it in inventory, all of that stuff. If you have anything, in that realm applies to you. I think duplicate search and elimination should be something you take a really close look at, because part numbers aren't free. I realize that I've said that I don't know how many times when talking about configuring a data management system, right? Just give it a new part number because part numbers are free. Well, no, they're not. not if you talk about taking that part number and actually executing the creation of the part that is described by that part number, right? Because you've got all these other things that go into taking something you've drawn on your screen and making a reality. And if that's a new part number and you've got processes around those new part numbers, there's some cost, if nothing else, in time, and often in actual dollars, right? Research by the Aberdeen Group says anywhere from, almost 5,000 to, tens of thousands of dollars, depending on your processes and the nature of that, right? So that can be a big deal, right? And so Autodesk is aware of that, right? And you've got this vault system, all your parts are in it. Wouldn't it be great if you could figure out how many of these parts are identical? Not just, oh, somebody did a save as, but geometrically identical, even if they started from completely different origins and were even drawn in different ways. Figure out, if you could, figure out how many are physically identical. And if nothing else, let somebody know. And then the right people could then take that information and maybe clean up and reduce the number of duplicate parts they have, shrink the number of part numbers you have, maybe even shrink your vault if it applies, right? But the big deal here is reducing the overall number of parts you have to manage, and make sure that you're not necessarily creating new part numbers and triggering all those downstream processes if there's something sitting in your vault that you could actually just reuse. So again, this goes beyond just metadata, beyond just what's the description of this guy, or was it a save as versus starting completely from scratch. That's why this is such a big deal. I don't know how they're doing it, but I think it's really neat, right? But the combination of all of that does a few things. One, if you can find a component to reuse, especially when you're about to release a new design, if you can find something to reuse, then it's much faster for you to maybe get something built and out the door. But also the way they've implemented this, it still lets you design the way you want to design if you're a designer. You keep going the way you want, and then as sort of like a last step before you release, you could figure out, okay, do I have anything here that I could just reuse? And one person did make a comment in the questions I think is important to note. It will flag geometrically identical parts even if they are different materials, right? So that is something to keep in mind, right? So a different material, if it needs to be a different part number, and it probably should, that is something to note. So, this number isn't necessarily gospel, right? This is pure geometric identity. You may need to investigate extended properties like material, or if it needs to be made in a different way for some reason, or if there's a different, if you need a different heat treat, or, anodized versus not anodized, right? So there are reasons why you might have geometric identity being the same, whereas they're really different part numbers. But this gives you a window into something you never really had before, without maybe just institutional knowledge, right? And so there's lots of potential benefit of this, right? From an engineering manager standpoint, I want to know how many duplicates do we have? Is it a problem or not? Do I need to take action? Whereas the engineer, they don't necessarily want to be forced. Maybe they've been told, for example, you guys are creating too many parts that are the same. It takes us a lot of time and money to execute all that. You guys need to start reusing more. It's like, okay, well, now I spend, half my time looking for something to reuse as opposed to just designing. Now this gives you the opportunity to continue to design in a way that meets your need, and then verify, yes, this does fit, versus maybe having to find something that's pretty close and then shoehorn it into a design, versus designing for the application and then maybe being lucky enough to find something that's the same, right? So let's take a look at this in action now. It's really pretty neat stuff. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a new assembly. Let's do that. So I've got a new assembly here. I'm making a little box, and maybe what I do all day is I sit here and make boxes. So I'm going to make a new part number here. at least for now. And I know in this particular application, what I'm trying to do, it's going to be a box. It's going to be a 2x2 box, right? And it's going to have a little pocket in here. We'll make this 1 inch. I know the pocket needs to be 1.5 inches. I know it needs to be a 1/2 inch deep, right? So I'm just drawing. I've started a part completely from scratch. I know I need some tapped holes in here. We'll put them on that spread. And I'm just going to use the corner points of this rectangle that I drew. And yeah, number 6 screws look pretty good to a depth. And we're going to go ahead and, cut through all, but we're only going to tap to that depth. Right. So that's my part, just like that. And we'll go ahead and give the assembly a part number as well. So now I'm just about ready to release this new assembly, but it's like, well, you know what? I know I've done a box like this before. There's got to be something like this out there. So what I could do, and what happens if you've got an existing large vault, as an administrator, you can say, look in the vault for these folders that I list up here and all their subfolders, and create an index of the geometric definition. And I don't know how they do it, but it actually happens pretty quickly. It doesn't take, I mean, my vault, I have like 400 parts or something in it, and it didn't seem to take almost any time at all. So they're doing it pretty quickly. But it builds that history. So if you've got an existing vault with lots of parts, this is still something that you can make use of. And then you could take a look at your duplicates dashboard and see in the case of my vault, over half of my parts are duplicates, right? And I can see of the 430 parts in my vault, 49 shapes are duplicated. So like over half of my total parts have more than one identical geometric definition. And there are 49 of those duplicates. And so, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that one or more parts in my vault exactly match this guy. Now, this is what you get out of the Vault client, is really just a picture of the total, right? And as you check files in, that geometric definition also gets indexed. So you only have to necessarily do the extraction, it only does that bulk extraction, I think, the one time. And so just by virtue of checking a file in, now that definition is there. And so what that means is if I'm back in Inventor, this file's not in the vault yet. I haven't vaulted any of this stuff, right? So I can take a look at my duplicates in Vault, and I could say, take a look at this entire assembly and show me any parts in my assembly that have duplicates in the vault. And now I can see, if I look at this particular part, there are actually 3 files in the vault already that have duplicates. And what we'll see here, there's a little icon that you'll see here down in a second, but this shows me, here are the different file names, here's where they are in the vault, here's when they were created, and how many different files this thing is used in. So like each of these is used in one assembly and they're all geometrically identical. I can also look at, the details of this, and I could see the history and the where used. So I get really good visibility into all of these different identical components. Now, if I were to open up another one of these, like from my workspace here, let's open up the Save Copy As one. And take a look at the duplicates. Actually, No, let's open up an assembly so we can look at it. Well, let's just do it this way. Let's look for a duplicate of this guy. Notice this special little icon here. This icon means not only was this a duplicate part, but it shares the same source. So basically this file must have been one of these two files, duplicate one or the save copy as, must have been saved from the original document. So the way Inventor files work, when a file is born, you know, it's a document, it gets some, I think it's an internal identifier or whatever, but when you save a copy of that file as something else, that same, the fact think of it, you might almost think of it just a unique identifier, that carries over. And so Inventor can understand, okay, this really is the same source document. And if you've ever done like replace component in Inventor and get a message saying it doesn't, it's basically not the same as the source you're replacing and you might lose your constraints, that's the same idea, that's the same information it uses. So if you see this little icon in the duplicate search, not only are they identical, but someone at some point probably just saved a copy, or maybe they did a copy design and it never actually changed, right? So it's pretty safe bet that if you replaced this component with this one, you're not going to have any trouble at all, because they started from the same source, they're still geometrically identical, and unless, like I said before, there's some other information that needs to make it unique, like it's material or a coating or something, then it's probably a pretty safe bet for you to just swap these files out. Now you do need to take care swapping the files, because it's not going to necessarily update or repair all of the constraints in an assembly. So it's still not magic, right? Now in this case, this same little box I've got in lots of different places. I've got the save copy as, which was from the same source. And so if you notice, I've got a flush constraint insert and mate to make sure, the lid stays on the box. Now, if I replace with the copy, right, notice it looks like it's out of joint. And the reason here is what I did in the copy as part of what I was testing to see how robust all this is, I went back to the copy and I changed the extrusion definition. So you'll notice in the case of the copy, the base extrusion is set one direction from the sketch plane, whereas in the original component, it's set symmetric from the sketch plane. And so when it does the replace, it does it with the same, it matches origin to origin. And so because of the difference in the extrude parameters, it's slightly out of place. But because it was from the same source, it understands all the geometry was the same, had the same IDs. And so all I need to do is do anything that triggers a constraint recalculation and everything's fine. Well, mostly fine, right? Because this did technically move a little bit relative to, this geometry moved a little bit relative to the assembly origin. So you still need to take a little bit of care there. Now, in this case, if instead I replace it with a component that doesn't have those relationships, you do get a warning here. It helps you find nearly identical parts. It's not an exact match, right? The reason it says it's not an exact match is because it didn't come from the same source. Even though everything else about it is geometrically the same, it was started from scratch. And so I can still replace it. And in this case, it looks like, okay, nothing changed at all. Well, actually, nothing did change at all. I'm not sure why that didn't happen. But what it should have done, and I'm going to do it here, I just want to highlight this. I want to make sure we all understand exactly what's going on. If I replace this with this guy, what you'll notice is my constraints blow up, right? And that's because Inventor still, it's not gonna assume that these, circles that I used, the circle that I used for the insert and this face, it doesn't necessarily assume that you wanted to reuse those faces. Constraints in Inventor are very precise, and they go to specifically tag geometry within a part. And so I do have to repair those. So again, it's not magic, right? There still may be some effort. I have to go back and repair these constraints. But the couple minutes tops that it causes me to do this, or that it takes me to do this, could save me a lot of time and money downstream. Now, a couple of questions about this have come up, and I want to address those. One that just came up, which is a really good question, is what if the two different parts were on different planes? I meant to test that, and I didn't. So let's try this right now. So my original part, I drew on the XY plane. We're going to draw the same part, and we'll make it identical on the YZ plane, right? So I'm going to make this as quickly as I can in the interest of time, but I think we still have time to do this, and it's an interesting experiment, and I don't want to, it's an important question, and I don't want to make you go look for it somewhere else. So I'm making this identical, just with a fundamentally different orientation. Now, I do expect that it would find it as a duplicate, I believe. But my expectation here is that it will come in at an incorrect orientation, and we'll have to fix the orientation issue as well. So this should now be identical to the others. I'm going to check it in. That way it's in my Vault, and Vault should automatically index it. So now if I come back to this assembly and open it back up and do a search, here's the new one, right? So it did find it, right? So it knows it's geometrically identical. Obviously it didn't start from the same source, but when I go to replace this, oh, wow, okay, so maybe there is a little bit of magic here, because, which I guess makes sense, it's geometrically identical, so there must be some identifier they can use for orientation. So while if you look at the two different files, if I undo that replacement, if we look at it, it's XY plane is parallel to the assembly XY plane right now. Once I do the replace with this other guy, and now we look at this one and look at its XY plane is actually parallel to the assembly YZ. So if it's not an exact match in terms of having the same source, then it looks like it does at least attempt to orient the part and position the part the same way the original was. So what that means is if it's successful in that, and I can only imagine there may be some parts where maybe that doesn't work. I don't know, maybe there's something there that just magically does it right every time. But I wouldn't necessarily count on it always happening unless I saw it like work 100 times on 100 different parts. But at least it tries to get it in the right spot with the right orientation. It at least tries to do that, and it may be successful always, I'm not sure. So another question about this, is this duplicate parts or duplicate drawings file geometry? This is specific to IPT files, as far as I know, and it is the geometric definition. It does not look for identical drawings. It is only the actual, probably something to do with like the BREP, what we call BREP data, boundary representation. There must be some technology where they can some sort of like quantify what that is. And so it doesn't apply to drawings at all. It wouldn't, as far as I know, apply to an assembly that also happened to have the exact same total geometry. As far as I know, it's only part files. And there was one more question as we're transitioning here about anything about updates to the thin client. I'm not aware of any updates to the thin client. I think some things were announced at an Autodesk event in the last few weeks, but I'm not fully aware of those, and I'm not sure if they're allowed. I've heard there's some interesting things coming, but I don't necessarily know what those are yet. As far as I know, I don't think 2021 introduces anything new to the thin client off the top of my head. Right. So hopefully that duplicate search is something that you can take advantage of. If nothing else, I think it's very cool. It could end up saving you a lot of time and money in the scheme of things. Now, there are a few more things that I'd like to talk about before we wrap up here, and we've got just a few minutes left. The rest of the changes are largely for admins. There are some really important ones, though, and I guess this actually might play in technically a change to the thin client now that I think about it. This might actually impact it. These changes, the big one here, the big two, the big one of all of these is restrict download. This is a new permission in Vault 2021, which is a huge deal. We've got now a more explicit audit log for download and delete, which is really nice. And then the rest of the things are really for admins and day-to-day type admin stuff, right? So the big one here, though, is a change to the security model. Prior to 2021, so 2021 and back, read permission in Vault was both you can see the record in Vault, and if it's a file, you can download it, right? And what that would lead to is, let's say you had a folder structure like your designs folder and then folder A, and inside that you had folder B, and then inside that you had folder C. And let's say people in the shop, they really need to see folder C and get something out of it. Well, they would need read permission on folder A and B as well, so that they could see that folder C even exists. Because of the security model prior to 2021, not only would they be able to see folders A and B, but they'd be able to download any of the files in those folders. That's just the way it worked, right? Read equals download permission. Well, with 2021 now, they're separate. Now we have different permissions for read and download. So now somebody out in the shop, they can see folders A and B, and they can even see their contents so that they could get down to folder C, but they won't be able to download anything in folders A or B, right? So now you've got more granularity there. You can more carefully control who can get that file. So here's a question about this came in. Does the message tell the person that is trying to download who to contact for access to the file? No. That would have to be some other procedure where they would know if they need to get a file and they can't download it, they would need to know who else to talk to. This is really a more fundamental thing in Vault, where I can show you straight away. Essentially what it does is, either on a file record, if you look at its details, if you were to override it, notice rather than just prior we had read, modify, and delete, now we have read, modify, delete, and download. So that's how this manifests. And this is essentially any permission dialog like this that you see. By the way, this is one of the other features, is you can now resize this guy. You couldn't do that before. That's a nice new admin feature. But now this separate download permission, and this applies not only to objects, but also to lifecycle as well. So if you look at the security tab here, read, modify, delete, and download now. So those permissions are now separated. Right. So it is important to note that all of your existing files, because of this new security model, existing files are going to behave the same way they did today. Anything existing in Vault is going to have the download permission there if read permission was there. So if you want to make this change, you'll have to be proactive and go and modify your security model to realistically take away download, either from some states or from some objects for those groups. So nothing is going to change when you upgrade to 2021 without you taking some action. So you don't have to worry about it too much. It's something there if you need it. You probably really need it, and this is amazing. If you don't need it, it's nothing to worry about. This is a question I've gotten many times over the years. We always could track deleted files. You had to go and turn something off on specifically in like a config file on the server to do that, and it would land, I think, either in the file store log or the Vault log, depending on the release. Now we have a specific setting in the Vault for tracking download and delete, and they go into their own files, so you don't have to sort through all of the other stuff. And because now we have download permission, we can track explicitly downloads. So I don't think I've deleted anything from my Vault recently, but if we go look at our console, we can see now I have audit logs and yesterday's log. We can see administrator at 4:22 p.m. Downloaded all of these guys, and it tells you the path and name. It tells you the version of the file and actually a file ID, which is an internal database thing. So you get pretty good feedback as far as who's downloaded what and who's deleted what. I haven't deleted anything here, but it would appear there as well. And this applies, the download is not just when you do a get, right? It's get, open, view in window, insert into CAD. So basically anytime the Vault gives you that file, even update view, right? You're technically getting a copy of that file to then process it into like a DWF, for example, or you're getting a copy of that file to create a shared view and upload it. You know, what this basically means is if someone comes to you and says, well, I've never seen that file, I never even touched it. Well, the log here says it came to your system somehow, right? So yeah, even though you never did a get, it was copied down to your system for some reason, right? So this could be extremely helpful in a case where maybe you have outside contractors connecting to your Vault for some reason. You know, this could really be amazing. We talked about resizing this dialog. The ability to hide disabled users. If you've never administered a Vault or if you never had to do this, you may not be aware, but you can never delete a user from Vault. You can only disable them. That's to make sure you don't lose track of who did what. You can now hide users that are disabled. So you might as well be deleting them. If you can't see them anymore, you can always turn them back on, right? And that applies both to user management and also when you're manipulating security. You may have noticed, if you are paying particular attention, the little red bar I have at the bottom of my Vault client here. This is a very minor feature, but can be very useful. Now, when you're logged in as administrator, the bar down here can be a different color, and you can control that color. Out of the box, it is green. I made it red for this presentation, so it would stand out a little bit more. But yes, you can now change, when you're logged in with administrator permission, the bar down here can be a different color. And then finally, some real backend type stuff. If you need to do a restore, like especially let's say you're following best practices and periodically restoring your Vault backup to make sure that it all goes well, you can do a quick file store validation, which does a faster double check on the file store. Just is the file there versus matching the checksum, right? And then this one, people have been asking this only forever. When you're installing Vault, you no longer have to use the Autodesk Vault instance name. This is especially helpful if you wanted to say you've got one license of SQL Server. It's a server-based license, and you need to have an instance for production and an instance for testing or dev. You could now have them on the same SQL server because you could use, say, a different instance name for dev or test. So this could be a huge deal for some people. Right, and so that's it. Just to summarize, better support for Revit interoperability by not having to check those Revit files into Vault. Duplicate search, which is a great bit of functionality. And then some more back-end stuff, right? Some more help for admins. All right, so please feel free if you've got other questions to type them into the question pane. There are a couple of questions, I think that, at least one question that came up that I didn't address yet. Does the number of licensing come into play when allowing someone to view or download? No. So the way Vault licensing works is if you're using what I would call the thick client or the desktop client, you have to have a license in order to use this installed application. And that license comes just like the CAD licenses do. So it's all based on, in the near term here, multi-user or single user. Eventually it's going to be named user. So your download permission in Vault, that is just assigning rights to someone. That has no impact on licensing whatsoever. And I think that was the only other question that I didn't address. So we'll maybe give it just another minute or so for additional questions, or maybe 30 seconds, because we've had an hour to ask questions now, so. Well, we're not seeing any more questions, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up then.
Okay, well, thanks, Forrest. And I will let people know that if you think of additional questions later, you can simply reply to that confirmation or reminder email you receive from GoToWebinar, and we can get those to Forrest or your sales rep, get your questions answered. Once again, I'll remind you about the survey. It will just pop up as we close down today. Also, another reminder that you will receive a recording of this presentation. It will be in your email tomorrow. And with that, I'll close things down. Thanks a lot.